Probasco has over 40 years of experience of infertility counseling and adoption experience. She's the founder and CEO of Clinical Counseling Associates and established adoption and fertility resources in 1993. She also established the first regional adoption agency and fertility clinic partnership in the U.S. in 2006 and operates locally in the Kansas City area.
Thank you so much. I just enjoy doing this. I woke up with this morning with a smile on my face that I get to do a webinar. But this is really a difficult webinar to listen to. It has a lot of significance for those that are struggling for infertility and really the grieving part of letting go of that child that you had hoped to bring into your family for many, many years. So there is a lot of emotions that impact infertility, and being able to let grieve and let the emotions rest for you will really give you an opportunity to prepare for your future children as they are coming to you. Next slide, please. So this grief process for infertility definitely is a life crisis that affects everyone in so many different ways. And I think a grief process that really is more than regular because when you have a parent die, you're really not in a financial crisis or a physical or medical crisis or a sexual crisis. So the infertility crisis is definitely significant. And we're going to talk about each way that this infertility issues you're affected by. So next slide, please. The physical. Oh, boy. So there's, why isn't my body working? I've taken care of my body. I'm healthy. Before I tried to get pregnant, I cleansed myself. I went on a good diet. I exercise. I'm doing all that I can for my body to be healthy to have a baby. And why isn't it working? It's just so perplexed, I think, for a lot of women especially of, my body, I was made to have a baby. I'm a woman, and my body is letting me down. So it's really a crisis physically. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we have the medical part. So 95% of those that seek treatment do end up with a diagnosis. The other 5% is unexplained, and that's also a difficult diagnosis to receive. So it's not all in your head. It's not that you're making this up or you're not doing things right. There is a medical reason that you have infertility difficulties. And I think it's also interesting to know that even as much progress as we've made in the fertility world, we still remain with only 50% of those that seek treatment actually achieve a genetic pregnancy. So I think that's really interesting because you see on ads and such from fertility clinics saying their success rate is 80 to 90%. But that's not for a genetic child. That includes other choices, other donor choices, donor egg, sperm, embryo, or as a success. So you need to be very careful when you're looking at statistics and knowing that this is about their pregnancies in general, not necessarily their genetic pregnancies. So therefore, there are a lot of people that are looking at options. And to look at those options successfully, being free of the grief connected to infertility is so helpful for everyone involved. So, of course, we are having advances in infertility treatment, but it's more in the freezing of human eggs. It's more in genetic, DNA, epigenetics, lots of those areas that are being expanded. But still a success for a genetic pregnancy is only 50%. Next slide. The emotional part. Oh, my gosh. So this isn't supposed to happen to me. The whole saying that first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes baby carriage. I have one daughter that just got married in November, so I kept saying that to her, and another daughter is getting married in June, and I keep saying that to her, and so far that's working out. But, you know, it doesn't work out for everyone. You know, people plan, and then when they're not able to complete that plan of being successful, they have so many emotions that they really haven't experienced before. They have jealousy, they have guilt, they have envy, the why me again, you know, it seems to happen for everybody else, and can contribute to low self-esteem and definitely impact one's emotional outwardly. Next slide, please. So the psychological, there is a difference from the emotional and psychological. Emotional is really the expression of the psychological loss. And psychologically, it's more of an inward feeling of inadequacy, of incompetency, feeling out of control, low self-worth. You know, if I'm not able to produce a child, what am I able to do? And really does affect people in their workplace. It affects them with their family and friends. And that's all psychological issues of trying to figure out, am I going to identify as an infertile person? That's not who I wanted to be. That's not who I feel like I need to be. But the circumstances that I'm living with definitely indicates that I am an infertile person. Next slide, please. So the financial, oh my gosh. There are a few states that have mandatory insurance coverage, and there are also a few companies that have mandated insurance for infertility. I remember I had a client that went to work for Walgreens, and I don't know if that's a facility throughout the country, but anyway, they have infertility coverage. So she worked part-time at Walgreens so she could pay for her infertility. But when you start looking at all the cost involved, and you know, the number 25,000 always comes up when we're talking about IVF and egg donor. That's kind of a typical range for adoption also. And a lot of couples are willing to put their finances at risk just so they can succeed with a genetic pregnancy. And oftentimes that means mortgaging their home, borrowing a lot of money, borrowing from their 401k. And so when it's time to parent, they don't have any of their resources available. So it's definitely a financial struggle. And when I see couples that are dealing with infertility, this is definitely one of them that comes out the most. And typically the husband wants to stop treatment and the wife wants to go ahead. She's ready to spend whatever dollars they have in order to become pregnant with their child. And this can be a marital struggle also. Next slide, please. The spiritual part. And this is really hard to talk about for folks because they do have a belief and a faith, and they see themselves as being faithful to their religion or to their faith, and now God has turned against them. I had one client that said, why would God put such a deep desire in my heart to give birth to our child and then take that away from me? So it's normal to want children, and it's normal to want a genetic child to be part of your family. That's all normal. But you start questioning, why was I given infertility? It's a crisis of your faith, of your understanding of your spirituality. And then also I think there's reminders all around that babies are born to unfit parents, and that really stirs up the more emotions also. Next slide, please. The sexual activity. You know, I think when we first get together and get married, and you know, we're in la-la land with all of our with our relationship and getting to know each other and becoming closer, and then we trying to have a baby, and maybe even before we know there's a diagnosis, we're on a calendar, we're on a schedule to have sex, and then the spontaneity definitely leaves their sexuality expression. So we're going to make a baby is the phrase, rather than we're going to make love with each other. I remember when I was a fertility patient taking my temperature every morning, so I was reminded every morning that I had infertility difficulties. And I also remember breaking a few of those thermometers because they didn't say the right thing. But we're kind of beyond the temperature taking, but that's still maybe a part of getting ready to become pregnant, that people experience that. So the emotional connection, the intimacy is on schedule, and it definitely can put a burden on that marital relationship and the need to be expressive with each other. I remember one couple I was working with, and the man said, well, why can't we have sex in other times of the month rather than just when you think you're ovulating? And she said, well, I don't want your sperm to be wasted. And we all smiled at that, but that's really true. Sex is for making a baby. It's not for our intimacy between each other. Next slide, please. People often find help in seeing people like myself, so we can sort out all of the emotions connected to their infertility, how they're managing the emotions and the crisis, and start talking about when is enough, and when can we safely say emotionally and psychologically that we need to move on to become parents in a different way. So I know therapy can be, of course, I'm a therapist, so I'm going to talk positive about it, but I get lots of feedback of, it was so helpful to talk to somebody else and really sort all this through and to give validation for all that they did experience. They may not have been successful in achieving a genetic pregnancy, but they definitely can be successful in achieving grief resolution and moving on to another choice to become parents. Next slide. So infertility as a crisis, also individually, couple, and a family. I think we talked about the individual and the psychological crisis, and am I fully woman? Am I fully man? If I'm not able to make a baby, and affects the self-esteem and value of yourself. And as a couple, there's some women or some men offer that are the ones that have the fertility difficulties, and oftentimes it's both. But for those that have the fertility difficulties, they may even offer a divorce. I want you to find somebody else that you can make a baby with. And so the recommitment to the marriage is a really strong part of the moving through the grief. When I was struggling with fertility, there was a country song that said, if I know what I know now, I would still choose you again. So I remember singing that, and I even brought a copy of that into some of my clients. So I think this is really a recommitment to the marriage. If I know what I knew now, that's saying, I would still choose you. I didn't marry you for your eggs, or I didn't marry you for your sperm. I married you for you. And let's get back to that place so we can celebrate our marriage. We are a family of two, and if you have little pets at home, you may be a family of more. But we are a family, and we need to stick together to get through this. The extended family, this is probably one of the things I hear most about. When I was struggling, it was my sister-in-law. She got pregnant very easily. She had 3 children before we even started, and would talk often at family gatherings about us not having children, and are we sure we're doing it right? All that nervy stuff that you just want to reach across the table and choke her. but I refrain from that. But I think that's true for a lot of families, because families are about children, and when you get married, there's expectations that children will eventually follow. So in trying to survive the extended family, a lot of folks avoid events like baby showers and different parties and christening because it's all about the baby and they're without. So I do coach with a lot of women about feeling like they need to go to this event, but what is their backup? So if they're in the bathroom too many times, then maybe they need to go out to the car and take a deep breath, walk around the block, do something to pay attention to their emotions rather than trying to hide the emotions. So extended family can be very hard, and then they don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't know whether they can ask questions. So it's really a complicated situation that affects a lot of people. And, withdrawing definitely comes from this. I had a client whose sister got pregnant before she got married, and she couldn't see her pregnant. So she was okay with seeing the baby, but she couldn't see her pregnant. So she avoided seeing her sister for the whole how many months of, for the 9 months of pregnancy. So that's pretty sad when survival means I have to avoid my family and avoid people that I know that I cherish their relationship. So it has an effect on you as an individual, as a couple, and for families. Next slide, please. So the grief and loss, the process of expressing the feelings is very good to understand and to accept that this is a process. I see a lot of families that start the grief and then they go right away to acceptance, and they haven't gone through the middle. And that middle will get them sooner or later. So grief is part of a process. It's an expression of a lot of feelings. In the psychological world, we used to think, well, it goes step by step by step. But it really is a revolving mixture of feelings and expressions that will be coming out ongoing as you're experiencing the grief. Next slide, please. So the denial, the detachment from feelings. This is really, really hard for folks to be in, but they're there a lot. If they think about going on to an alternative, they really don't want to know anything about it. Just give me the baby, and that's all I want to know. I don't want to have all these third-party people that I have to talk to. I don't want to have any information about the donor we chose because then I can pretend that it's really me. I'm really jealous of a birth mom that's able to become pregnant, or if I choose embryo adoption, I'm jealous of the genetic family that was able to have children. So lots of detached from feelings that are not processed. I remember one of the saddest things I saw when I was working at an infertility clinic. One of the patients adopted a little person, and they were 1 month old. She came into the fertility clinic carrying her really not in a tender way, and was signing up for her shots so she could start an IVF process. So, the thought of, well, just give me a baby and I'll be okay, doesn't really work. Because if you haven't grieved the genetic child, that genetic child will always be prominent in all of your emotions and feelings towards the child you bring in from adoption. So this is really a time that us as therapists need to help people get through. And if they come to us with in denial state, then we tenderly need to coach them in moving forward with their grief process. The next slide, please. I'm doing more of this. So if you proceed with a decision during denial, this is what we've seen. So we see parents that are unable to tell the story. I saw a mom that has 2 children by donor, and I was the first person she's told that she had these children by donor. and she's really struggling with, do I tell my adults now, or what do I do? So it's without the acceptance of the decision of how you're going to become parents and really process that through, you're going to be in a state of denial for years. And this lady, I think she's in her 70s, so that's too long to suffer. We also see, especially in families we followed through adoption, that it's hard for them to feel authentic because they weren't part of the birth process, and therefore they see themselves emotionally more like the child's friend than than how they need to parent a child. All children need parenting and discipline, and they're more reluctant to engage in that kind of process. And they also will find themselves, if they spend all their money trying to get a genetic child, that they're without resources to help them parent that child. So there's lots of circumstances that follow moving forward when you're still in the denial process. Next slide, please. Anger, boy, yeah, I see a lot of folks. So feel angry at everyone. And the struggles, there's the talking to the third party again, complain about the people they choose, complain about a birth mother that chose them to parent their child, that she's not doing everything right, trying to control what she eats, what she drinks, and just really out of control with trying to be in control. Just want to fix to the problem. I don't want to have to deal with it. I don't want to have to deal with the grieving. I don't want, the anger is so intense that if I start talking about being angry, I'm going to explode. So this definitely is a difficult feelings, and as a therapist, you see the anger expressed a lot, which is helpful, though. Next slide, please. So the bargaining. A lot of people get stuck here, and they believe the myths. So the myths out there that if you start the adoption process or you've chosen a donor, for sure you'll get pregnant. And it's kind of like magical thinking. It's really a 2 to 3 year old kind of magical thinking about their life, and so it's really it adds to the emotional attachment with the resulting child. I remember in our adoption history and many years ago that folks would adopt and then expect to become pregnant, and when that didn't happen, really had raised a child in an unemotional household, that they really didn't want them. They wanted the genetic child, and it was their job to get them a genetic child, and they didn't fulfill that. So there's a lot of children that were being parented with non-emotional parents. We see people, I get calls, can I sign up with your program and another program? I just want this as soon as possible. And the hope of achieving a genetic child still remains a prominent hope, and it rules a lot of the emotions and feelings, again, without the grief process. Next slide, please. Depression. This actually is a good stage, or a good expression to be in, because that means the feelings are prominent and no one can ignore it. It's a lot to go through. It's really hard to witness and hard to process for the individuals and the couple. But this is the beginning of getting the feelings processed and getting the feelings dissolved. This also is a good time to be in therapy. It may be necessary to be on antidepressants, especially if the dark hole is not subsiding. When you are in depression, there can be lots of physical consequences with that. Lack of energy, no hope, nothing's going to work for me, just really a sense of sadness of not having their own child, and I want my own child. I don't want somebody else's genetics or somebody else's child. But this is a stage that is very helped a lot through therapy and can get some resolution and some processing so that they can move through to the acceptance. Next slide, please. So letting go of the genetic child. People say, well, what do you mean, Chris? How am I supposed to grieve? Am I just sit here and grieve, or what am I supposed to do? I think a lot of times action helps with the process of the letting go, and dedicating certain actions to letting go of the genetic child is really helpful. So these are a list of things that I have had families do over the years in the letting go. And I think it's been very, very helpful. So they have a memory of the action that they took that represented letting go of the genetic child, so that when their feelings of depression or anger or resentment come up, they're able to say, well, I worked with that. I did the best I could in letting go. I may have more to let go, but they have a memory of how they started the process of letting go. One of my clients took baby pictures of she and her husband and put it in a little test tube and buried it with her grandmother. And she also had pregnancy losses, so she wrote a little note and asked her grandmother to take care of those little souls for her. And it was very, very helpful. They were able to move on to adoption and were very successful parents. So, you know, these different things are really, really helpful. The grief, the letting go will be more significant if there's been pregnancy losses. I saw a woman that had 5 pregnancy losses, 5 miscarriages in different stages, even a stillborn. And so we went through all of the losses and discovered how old the children would be at this time if they were able to be born. And then she bought clothing and toys of those particular ages and donated it to a children's home. She came back the next time with a grin on her face, and she actually said, I wasn't able to parent my children got a start, but they weren't able to stay. But these children are here, and they needed, they don't have much, and they needed these things. And I brought joy to them and brought joy to their family, and that feels so good. So getting to feeling joy and getting to feeling I did what I could is very, very helpful in maintaining the success for grief release. Okay, next slide, please. Acceptance. Boy, that is a big word. And this is very, very important. It's a time where self-esteem is no longer connected to one's ability to reproduce. Now, that's a pretty powerful statement. So we make statements of, we are an infertile couple, I have infertility difficulties, I went through years of treatment, we did everything we could, and now we're moving forward. Our ability, our infertility does not reflect our ability to be parents. One of the physicians that I used to work with and no longer is with us, he would say, you know, if I had a crystal ball, I could tell you more about what's going to happen, but I don't. So I really want you to think, do you want to become genetically pregnant, or do you want to parent? And maybe now is the time to think about letting go. I mean, he wasn't saying, I wouldn't continue to treat you, but he was saying, you've done a lot, and it may be time for you to focus on, I want to become parents. Fertility treatment isn't bringing me the opportunity to become parents, but there are other opportunities that I can choose to become parents. One of the counseling sessions I do is resource counseling. So when people are ready to look at other alternatives, and January is a big month for me in seeing people, of what are my options, what's involved with all the options. So they're ready to hear about it, they're ready to learn about it, they're ready for education, they're ready for research and finding out what resource fits with them, finding out all the legalities, all the emotions from the other side of it. They're able to understand birth mother's quest in placing her child, that this is really hard for her and probably the most selfless thing she'll ever do in her life, and to really have empathy for her, to understand about donors, that there are women and men that are willing to donate their genetics for us to have a baby. There are men and women that have made embryos that are willing to allow us to have them placed in an embryo adoption. So they have empathy and sometimes sympathy for the others that they're going to be bringing into their lives. They no longer have the anger of, well, they were successful and we weren't. There are others that are going to help us become parents, and we forever will be grateful. And then we need to focus on what is best for the child. Next slide. So couples that recognize the decision are now ready to create a new dream. So they've crossed the bridge, shall we say, and left infertility behind, and now they're in their new journey to create a new dream. So what will this dream look like? And they're interested in doing it right. They're interested in getting to reliable resources. They're interested in getting to specialists that deal with adoption or donor issues. They're very available for the education and information. You can just tell it when you sit down with them, that what they've done in order to prepare themselves to talk about these alternatives. They're also available for validation. We did everything we could. Even our physician told us we did everything we could, and it wasn't meant to be. We don't know why, but most people say when they meet their child through their own donor birth or through an adoption, that this is why we had our infertility. We wouldn't have met this child if it wasn't for our infertility. So give value to that experience, so that experience moved us to the child that we were meant to parent. And my experience doesn't impact my ability to parent if I successfully have grieved. I've let go of the anger, of the resentment. I'm no longer jealous. I can be part of the parenting groups because I am a parent. I may not be able to talk about my own pregnancy unless we do donor, but I'm able to talk about my successes and our journey to this child who we love dearly, and this child that was meant to be ours. So there also will be more advocating for the child, and I really see this after the grief has been turned around and digested, is what decisions do I need to make that's best for the child? And this especially with donor conceptions of the anonymous part of it. And it's hard for a child to be anonymous. And I think the parents, as they're choosing donor, really need to focus on, if I was this child, what would I need to know? Do I need to choose an open donor? Do I need to be part of a registry so that the genetic factors will always be available for my child? Do I need to make sure that when they're of age they can meet their donor if possible? What about the genetic family that created the embryos? There are full siblings in that family. what kind of connection can we make with them so that our child would understand their story and then also be helpful for their children, because they are connected genetically forevermore. And we want to respect and honor that. And I think I had one client said, well, I'm not able to give my genetics, but I sure am able to make decisions that will secure my child's connection to their genetic families. Next slide, please. Oh, these are my people. Annette Barron, she's wrote Adoption Triangle in the early 70s. First book to talk about any kind of openness with adoption. She started the revolution, she and her colleagues, and she has passed from us, but I just honor and respect all the education that she gave me. She took me in like a little chick, and she was a mother hen, and really helped me understand and process all the different issues connected to adoption as well as donor. She and a colleague wrote the book Lethal Secrets that talks about the secrecy in donor conceptions and really the inappropriateness of that institution. And then my next gal, Sharon Roja. She's going to have a birthday soon. She looks so cute there. She wrote The Open Adoption Experience, and it's probably a 15-year-old book, but, you know, once you have the correct way of doing things, it just falls in place. She is happy to say that 95% of all infant adoptions are open adoptions. And so all the research and education and talking that these two ladies represented in the world has really paid off. I remember one of the first things that Sharon said is that a child is like a layer cake. The bottom layer is nature, top layer is nurture, and then the frosting is environment and community. So if we're rejecting the bottom layer, we know nothing about the bottom layer, then we really have an unsettled cake and an unsettled child, because we need to honor and respect them as a whole person. Next slide, please. So the nature-nurture question. The adoption community have been dealing with this for a long time. We used to, in the adoption world, separate multiples with the thought of, well, we'll just spread more children around. And at that time, parents were not told about any information about the children, date of birth maybe, and such, but that's about it. So in the twin study that started in the 70s, which was when the adoption reform movement started, they were able to study twins that were separated at birth and multiples. There were triplets also. They were able to reach these adults through, next slide please. They were able to reach these adults through search and reunion groups. There's over 130 search and reunion groups in the United States, and more states are becoming where records can be released. Records have been closed in 48 states forever, and now we have, I think, 10 more states that have open records. And that's just people's information, so it just didn't make sense. But the interesting part of this is that they had also a control group of twins that were raised together. And the testing included personality, aptitude, genetic testing, personality evaluations, emotional evaluations, medical, and next slide, please. And they found that the twins raised separately were more alike than the ones raised together. So nature just became part of who they were. With the twins that were raised together, they strived to be different. With the twins that didn't know of each other, they just did what nature brought to them. So it's just such an amazing study. If anybody's interested, the University of Minnesota is the one that has been conducting this and still does. So people used the same toothpaste, same cologne. When they took pictures of them, they were standing the same way. They were in the same occupations. They married women of the same names. I mean, it was just nature taking its course. And it's really true. Who we are is by nature and by nurture. Next slide, please. So yes, the fertility world has been very slow in recognizing the impact of the genetic distribution. On the donor sibling registry, they do have a donor that has 350 kids. It's just mind-boggling that there's how many siblings have siblings, how many first cousins out there, without any regulations, without any acknowledgement of these genetics being spread out. My hope in my life is before I retire from this business, I don't know if I ever will, that we'll have a federal registry like other countries does, so people can keep track of each other. However, DNA has come to, in some ways, people's rescue. I work with a colleague that found out he was donor conceived when he was 34 years of age. He did DNA testing from the 3 major sites, found a third cousin in Australia that then led him to find 34 half-siblings, and they also found that their biological father was part of the medical industry at the time, so they didn't use a donor as their parents thought. It was one of the medical staff that was the genetic parent. So my hope is with some regulations and some registries that we're going to be, the fertility industry is really going to be saying that this is foolish to have anonymous donors. They're going to find each other anyway. Let's just be upfront and help the child while they're growing to make sure we have medical information to them and social information to them. Next slide, please. So, you know, our job is important. Our job is to understand those that are grieving from infertility, and accept that they are letting go of a child that they have, for lack of better words, emotionally conceived. And letting go of that child is a very hard process.